Let me give you a little background about my interest in this field. I was 14 years old and living in Denmark when I woke up one night and stepped out of my bed and then wondered why I was up. I looked around the room and I saw that my body was still lying on the bed. I had what is fairly well known nowadays. It's called an out-of-body experience, and probably several in this room have had experiences like that. But anyhow, for me it was remarkable, a very curious event, and it continued intermittently into my until about 20 years ago. Was I really out of my body? Was I really wandering around in space? Or was it some sort of hallucination? That was a question for a long time. And then finally I had to conclude that it really was a mental event. It was a hallucination. I wasn't really out there. But anyhow, well, that was one thing that was a powerful influence in my life. When I had these experiences, I went to a Danish author who was a neighbor of mine and who reviewed parapsychological books for the Danish newspapers. He was also interested in Eastern philosophy, and he lent me several books on that subject, including the Bhagavad Gita, which will probably be known to most of you, an old Indian text that tells about the nature of the self from the perspective of Indian philosophy. According to that perspective, the true self is not represented by an out-of-body experience. It's not represented by the experience of having a separate identity, a separate body, a separate personality, but that self is a self that includes the physical universe. Physical universe that's also mental or psychological universe. And that seemed to me to be much more interesting than the out-of-body edition. So the Bhagavad Gita told me exactly how to become aware of this big mind, this big body. And what you had to do was simply to sit on the floor and cross your legs such that your right foot rested on your left thigh, and your left foot rested on your right thigh. And when you achieved this and meditated, kept your mind a blank, then you would be open to this big experience. Well, almost immediately I did that. I experienced a truly extraordinary, never experienced anything like that before, a really extraordinary pain in my knees. I don't think anybody is understanding what I'm saying. All right, good. Well, anyhow, that was really, later on I did a lot of meditation, very seriously. And the pain became less, but the insights into this big mind really weren't changed much. Now, before I elaborate any more, Let me, I'll get to the main topic of the evening, poltergeists and hauntings. We'll also discuss that. And basically, my interest in poltergeist phenomena was not because I thought this would be something very interesting to explore, but let me go back a bit. I started my research in parapsychology at Oxford University, and this actually is where Lisa was born. Not at the university, but in the hospital in Oxford. I set up a little laboratory to do experiments in parapsychology. And at that time, my interest was entirely on experimental work. Dr. Ryan at Duke University in North Carolina sent me ESP cards, those cards you guess, and other materials, so I could conduct proper experiments in ESP. I also looked at the connection between ESP and personality traits, extroversion and introversion, and the connection between ESP and memory. So these were things that were of interest to me. I hope all these cameras don't disturb me. Aren't disturbing for you? I usually have many more cameras than I go. Anyhow, and then Dr. Ryan, after I'd been at Oxford for several years, Dr. Ryan invited me to go to join the parapsychology laboratory at Duke University. And at Oxford, I just got borderline significance. My results, I evaluated the results statistically, and I achieved a significance level of 0.01, 1 in 100 against chance, and that was as far as I got. And that is all reasonably impressive. And when I got to Duke, I assumed that now I would really learn to do experiments and get really significant results. Well, I got no results at all. So when Dr. Ryan told me about a house with moving objects, with flying objects, and asked Dr. Pratt, his assistant director, and me to go up there, I was keen to follow his direction, because here finally I might encounter something real, a real phenomenon. Well, that basically led to my interest in poltergeist cases and haunting cases. I didn't expect to learn anything significant about the self, about my out-of-body self. I should mention that, I don't know if I mentioned that, but we did a lot of experiments at Duke with students who had out-of-body experiences. And sometimes they were successful, sometimes they were not successful. We would send them into another room where we'd set up targets, letters of the alphabet on the wall, and they would be sent in there to watch, to see these letters and then report back to us. And basically they were not any better than chance. So even people who were adepts at having out-of-body experiences really didn't succeed in my experiments, at least. And the big mind seemed to be entirely out of my reach. The big mind, the study of the big mind, was a kind of parapsychology. So over the years, I was fortunate enough to be able to investigate several poltergeist cases. And one of these I'll show you tonight. Now, I was here 2 years ago, I think, right?
3 years, I think.
Yeah, 2 years ago. And I showed this same film. Aside from Björn, was anybody there who was here 2 years ago?
3.
3 years ago. You were there?
Yeah, I was there.
Ah, well, you are very persistent. I appreciate that. And you have also been at several parapsychological conferences. Yes. Okay, well, let me see if I can press the right buttons here.
At least one noted parapsychologist believes the truth lies elsewhere. The mysterious power of the mind. Tina was born on October 26, 1969, in Columbus, Ohio. 10 months later, Tina's mother brought her to the hospital and then disappeared. That same day, Tina was placed in the home of Joan and John Resch, longtime foster parents who cared for more than 250 children.
She came into our home as a foster child when she was 10 months old. She'd been abandoned in the hospital by her mother. And we took care of foster children and they called us, brought her out, and we fell in love with her right away.
Although the Resches had 5 children of their own, they adopted Tina. She was a happy little girl with a bubbly personality. Sometimes Tina boiled over. At the age of 8, she was diagnosed as hyperactive and placed on medication.
Teacher at school said she was throwing erasers and pencils and causing a problem in school. And I asked the teacher if she ever saw her do it, and she said no, she had never seen her do it, but she was sure it was Tina that was doing it.
The teachers made a big deal out of taking me out of the room to give me my medicine every day and drawing attention to it instead of quietly just giving it to me to take. Kids poked fun and said it's because I was crazy or that I had some mental problems, and kids are cruel.
The cruelty would only worsen. Tina's parents took her out of school after the other children actually tied her up and taunted her mercilessly on the playground. Tina did her schoolwork at home with a private tutor. Initially, the change seemed to work. Tina apparently thrived and loved helping out with the foster children. Everything seemed calm, but subconsciously, Tina was under tremendous stress.
I left home on Sundays to go to church and on Thursday to go to Girl Scouts. Any other time I stayed home, I didn't go to a friend's house. They didn't come to mine. I was just there with my parents 24 hours a day.
March 1984. Suddenly, on a quiet Saturday morning, reality began to go askew.
The hands just started going around at a very fast pace. The lights in the kitchen came on.
Tina!
I didn't know what was happening.
Did you turn the light on? No, I was in the other room. Turn it off, please, honey.
At first, Joan assumed Tina was playing a prank.
Tina! Were you crazy? Fooling around. Not fooling around. What did I do? What'd you turn the light back on for? I didn't. Well, it's not.
Decided to just turn the TV off. And when I turned it off, the picture was still there and the sound was still there. So I unplugged it. And when I unplugged it, the same thing. I thought, something happened, that we were getting surges of power. I noticed things were happening so fast you really didn't have time to think about it. The foster children were enjoying it, the ones that were big enough. I mean, they thought it was a real treat.
John Resch had been out running errands. When he returned, things were still haywire.
So what's in here?
John Resch immediately telephoned Bruce Claggett, an electrician.
There was an ungodly howling on the phone, just an eerie howl that I'd never heard before, and it was so loud and disruptive you couldn't talk over it. It would howl and we'd have to quit our conversation and wait till the howl died down and then start talking. And it was just as though it wasn't wanting us to communicate.
Think it might be out here? Yeah. That's where I always like to check first. It's on the breakers.
Immediately I went to the main breaker box, took the cover off the fuse box, and I inspected all of the breakers and looked for any hot spots, no loose joints. Common reasoning was out the window, it seemed like. I just didn't know what was happening.
Breaker box is fine, exposed wire is fine, can't find anything wrong.
Well, there was something wrong with it this morning. I believe people not have anything now. If it happens, it can be broken. All right? Sure. Thanks a lot.
As soon as Bruce Claggett walked outside, the electricity started to act up again.
Dad!
Bruce.
Just as Joan had earlier, Bruce also suspected a teenage prank.
Is there a wall switch for that?
Yeah, right there.
Well, it's on.
Yeah, of course it's on.
So what's the problem? The switch is on, the lamp is on.
That's the problem. The lights go on and off, switches go on and off.
By themselves, up and down?
That's what happens.
Tina.
This just didn't make sense, and I thought, she's playing tricks on her dad, turning lights on and off.
Yeah, I never check this out, okay?
I thought, well, I've got to have some way of turning that switch off and keeping it off. I thought, well, I'll put some tape on the switch and that way it'll keep it from coming on. My thought process is, no lights can come on because I have taped them down.
Okay, I should do it.
Bruce taped every light switch in the living room. Then he and John went back to the switch by the front door to wait. They waited in the wrong place.
The tape was gone, and I saw that the switch was in the up position, but there was no sign of any Scotch tape. I had seen a phenomena that I cannot explain. The hair raised right in the back of my head, and I was scared. I have to admit, I was scared. I wasn't fearful for my life being threatened or anything, but it just scared me to know that something's being able to do this without human hands touching me.
Bruce Claggett finally gave up and left. But electrical problems would turn out to be the least of the Resch's worries.
What happened?
Did you see that? Did you see that? What happened?
Oh, somebody pushed over my chair.
Yeah, somebody pushed over the high chair.
Well, I felt somebody push it. I felt someone behind me.
There are
Okay?
strange things happening around here, I'm telling you. Strange things. Over at the high chair. Hear that? Something broke.
Well, he was really getting upset. He had a hard time accepting everything that came along. Tina just said, I suppose I'll get blamed for this too. And within a couple hours, you couldn't even walk in that room. It was just full of glass. We had coasters that would fly around the room that had been on the bar, and things were just moving constantly.
I'm gonna be out for a few minutes. Where are you going?
With no end of havoc in sight, Tina went out for a walk.
All of a sudden, when she left the house, everything got real quiet. I got thinking back at other things that had happened when she was younger, and I thought maybe it all had a connection. Maybe this wasn't new, and that maybe she'd been blamed for a lot of things of which she had no control over.
Whenever I'd leave the house, everything would be quiet until I returned home. Or if I was sleeping, as long as I was asleep or not home, everything was quiet and peaceful.
That night, after Tina returned home, it became clear to her that she was at the center of whatever was plaguing her home. The next morning, more of the same.
Goes again.
Joan and John had become almost most blasé.
Where did this one come from?
From off of the counter.
But you weren't gonna put them on the counter anymore. I thought you were gonna put them in the cupboard, keep them in the cupboard.
My husband spent a good deal of time just cleaning up, sweeping, trying to keep a path through the house.
Tina, put the eggs into the refrigerator, please.
They were breaking and we thought we'd put them back in the refrigerator and just take one egg out at a time. But the eggs came out through the door. By the time we were through with breakfast, we really had a mess.
I didn't know what to think. We were studying theology about devils and all this. That's gotta be it. That's gotta be it. Or this house is haunted. Something wrong with this house.
And in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I admonish you, Satan, to depart from the premises, never to return.
John Resch called her minister. He attempted to cleanse the house and Tina herself of evil spirits.
I was sick at the time also. I was having headaches and stomach cramps. People tried to tell me that I was possessed, and that scared me because I was just being confirmed in one church. And I had all these people telling me that I'm possessed, I'm going crazy, there's something wrong with me, and I started believing maybe there was something wrong with me.
Why now? Why all of a sudden are all these things happening?
And the minister asked if he could talk to us for a little bit, so we went into the living room.
Like, see, now there, that's what I mean.
And he looked around to see if there was anyone else other than Tina and her father and I. And there wasn't.
Where's he?
And he said, there's some things we do not understand, and there really wasn't anything else he could do.
The bizarre occurrences and Tina's physical symptoms worsened. Doctors could find nothing wrong. Desperate for help, Joan called Mike Hart, a reporter who had earlier done a story on the Resches as a model foster family. Hart brought photographer Fred Shannon with him.
You gentlemen, sit down, make yourself comfortable, and I'll make some coffee.
Okay.
Right.
So, Tina, when these things happen,
Tina was sitting there. To her left and on the floor was an Afghan. And that Afghan sat there all this time while we were there. I'm looking right at her.
God!
This Afghan lifted off the floor and zipped and covered her head.
Pretty much happens everywhere. I couldn't really select one place.
I bring the camera up to my eye with my finger on the trigger. And I waited, and I waited. In 25 minutes, my arm got tired and nothing happened. So I brought the camera down. I went this way, and the phone went that way. What's that tell you?
Tina, do you know what's causing this?
Whatever this thing is, the force, or whatever you want to call it, it knew I had a camera. The force did not want its picture taken. So at this point, I had a camera up to my eye about 5 minutes. And I very slowly, with my finger to the camera, my eye continues to go over it. Bingo! Pop the trigger, and that's the picture the world saw.
I did not see her start it in motion, or aid its motion, or help it in any way. It moved from left to right in front of her. That's her left to right on a level, even trajectory. That's it. That's what I saw. How do I explain it? I don't know.
Tina Resch became a media sensation. She was hounded by journalists, many of them highly skeptical. One of the reporters generated a different kind of headline. He and his crew caught Tina in the act of hoaxing an episode.
They kept telling my mother, well, we're not gonna leave unless we see something happen. My mom said, all right, something's gotta happen, because she was getting tired of this, and she's not the type of person to be pushing and telling me to leave. So I sat on a chair and knocked the lamp over. My mom took me in another room, she said, we gotta do something. Is it okay?
And then I was coming out of my room and
Tina's explanation satisfied most of her media critics. Mike Hardin called in noted parapsychologist William Rowe, formerly affiliated with Duke University in North Carolina. His specialty is psychokinesis, movement of inanimate objects apparently caused by the power of the mind.
For the first 3 days, nothing happened in my presence, and I was sort of dubious. But then, on the 4th day of our visit, things began happening in my presence.
Now we are in Tina's bedroom, and it's Thursday morning, and at this particular point in time, there haven't been any occurrences. Tina is kneeling.
I was watching her on the other side of the bed. She was cleaning up some water she just spilled.
She's about 7 feet from me at this particular point.
I didn't touch it, I didn't do it.
Now we just had our first occurrence.
Tina obviously had no contact with the cop. Now I knew that this was for real and that there was something happening in the home. There was another incident where there was a crashing sound behind me in the bedroom, in the master bedroom. I went in and found a painting on the floor leaning against the wall. Tina was very upset about this because this was her mother's best picture.
Not to worry, I'll get there. All right.
There was a pair of pliers that I decided to use as a makeshift hammer.
Just like you knew. Yes, my tape recorder.
At last, it appeared that Tina's paranormal powers were putting on a show for William Rowe.
Yes, I see.
It was clear to me that it needed to be researched further. And it was also clear that Tina was a girl who needed counseling, she needed help. And we decided that she returned with me to North Carolina where we could continue counseling with Tina.
William Rowe became convinced that at the time, Tina was unusually susceptible to electrical energy. A magnetic storm in the Earth's atmosphere may have triggered an ability to inadvertently manipulate the physical environment.
Occurrences that happened in the Resch home were an expression of Tina's inner turmoil. There's not, I think, a sharp distinction between what's in here and what's out here. The two are interrelated, are meshed with each other. And in Tina's case, this force, this energy, was stronger than it is for most of us.
I think it just built up until it got to a point it exploded. And it just seemed like she had no control over it, that she was, in a way, doing it with her mind.
Tina's symptoms, the psychokinetic occurrences, eventually subsided. The day they had disappeared almost entirely, yet the emotional scars remain.
I just feel that anybody who knows about this is gonna look at me like I'm crazy. And it's just another thing to be different. It doesn't end. Because I can't cover up my past and I can't hide it from anyone. So it's right out there in plain view. I feel vulnerable to it.
What are we to make of Tina Resch? It is important to remember that each episode was witnessed, and in one case even photographed, by someone other than Tina. She herself never claimed to have any special powers. In fact, Tina Resch always appeared more mystified, and certainly more distressed than anyone else when it came to the bizarre events she seemed to precipitate. The official position of the mainstream medical community is that psychokinesis, the ability to move objects with the mind, does not exist. However, when we called the psychology department of a major university, one of their eminent PhDs quietly admitted, quote, "It may not exist officially, but I myself have seen it happen and have no explanation for it. No explanation at all."
there's a little picture of what went on in this home. I later, as a clip, the video clip said, I brought Tina to North Carolina partially to continue therapy, but also to continue the research. And I hoped to observe the movements of objects, and I observed several myself, and I was personally convinced that these occurrences were real, but it was my hope to study them in a laboratory away from the home situation of Tina herself. There were several occurrences in my home and in the home of a psychologist that was working with Tina, that was helping us, helping Tina to deal with the problems in her life. The psychologist, the parapsychologist I worked with, Stephen Bauman, was setting up some experiments in psychokinesis, in what's called makro-psychokinesis. This is, if these events, as they appear to be, are examples of psychokinesis, they are called makro-pk, pk involving large objects. Micro-pk involves very small deviations from chance that have to be statistically evaluated. And he was working with a nerve cell, a pacemaker nerve cell from a sea animal, from a sea snail, and was trying to have his subjects attempt to speed up or slow down the firings of this nerve cell. And the results were fed into a computer, and the computer analyzed the results for deviations from random firings of this sea snail. He also worked with what's called piezoelectric crystals. These crystals, these formations, are highly sensitive to pressure. They are they are found in human teeth, in human bones, and in connective tissue. And when we are injured, have a tooth infection and so on, then we feel pain because these piezoelectric crystals shoot off electricity. So to me, this was interesting, partially to get evidence of psychokinesis and partially to get evidence of the kind of psychokinesis that might be relevant to healing, because nerve cells, of course, are a significant part of the human body, and so are piezoelectric crystals. And unfortunately, when Tina came to North Carolina, came to this institute, Steve was not ready. The equipment was not ready. So she had to return back to Ohio. And then later on, we hoped that she could again participate in these PK experiments. Well, it was October, this was March '84, it was October '84, before Steve was ready. By that time, unfortunately, the movements of objects around Tina had ceased. There was nothing of interest happening around her. But anyhow, she came. We could at least do these PK experiments, these experiments in makro-pk. She was willing to do it, and Steve Bauman was very interested in doing these experiments. Before the test, there was the research group consisted of 3 people, Steve, myself, and Jeannie Legel, a psychotherapist, who had who had accepted the role of being Tina's counselor and was also a member of our research team. And Jeannie suggested that we should try to bring the poltergeist phenomena back using hypnosis. I was not very keen because about doing that because I tried it in another case and it didn't really work. But she suggested a somewhat different approach. She suggested that Tina's physical symptoms at the time of the events, there were two physical symptoms. One was stomach pain and one was headaches. And she brought back, she thought we should try to bring back these symptoms in a responsible therapeutic session, in a responsible therapeutic way. And so she discussed whether Tina was willing to do that, whether she would be interested in doing that. Tina said she would be. And so she got Tina into a deep state of relaxation, and they were sitting, this was a sort of exploratory study in my, outside my home in North Carolina. And they were sitting outside by a table, a garden table, and several objects, including some that Tina had brought along herself, were placed on this table as targets for makro-pk or for RSPK, for poltergeist occurrences. And after the procedure, and they've been sitting there for a while around this table, Jeannie continued her hypnotic suggestions and nothing happened. And then they decided to go inside for a drink, and then when they left the table, one of the objects fell off and moved several feet. This was repeated several times. The first time, Jeannie couldn't be sure whether Tina had not just taken an object along and then thrown it, but later on, she had Tina walk in front of her, and 3 or 4 more objects moved while Tina was under observation. The last of these took place, the last of these Jeannie observed herself. Tina was, it was when she was walking away from the table that things would happen. And Tina got to the door of the house when Jeannie, who was watching her, saw something hit Tina in the back of the head. And an object fell to the ground. Tina screamed out and threw the thing away. And screamed out, "Stop hurting me," and threw it away. So the object, by the way, was a fork. I should mention that before Tina came to North Carolina, she wanted to see whether she might still have some makro-pk, and she'd heard about metal bending parties, probably many of you have, a little like Uri Geller's phenomena, where people will cause metal objects to bend without apparently interfering with them. So anyhow, she seemed to have been able to do that, and she brought some of these. She brought a couple of forks and a spoon along, and this was among the target objects that we had put on this round table in my backyard. So the phenomena seemed to had been revived, it seemed. Then we brought Tina to Steve's lab, and she would do the experiments with the piezoelectric crystal and with the nerve cell. And then there would be, between the experimental sessions, there would be rest periods. And during these rest periods, objects moved in the lab. We put out objects, we put out things on a table, so we could be sure, so we could know exactly where the things came from. Tina was not allowed near the table, but otherwise she could move freely around. The table was in a special, it was in a conference room, and most of the things that moved from the table moved when Tina was in other rooms away from the table. There were 8 incidents where objects moved from this table, and another 22 when Tina was observed when things happened. So we were satisfied that the occurrences were genuine. Let's see, Arian, we start at 7 or 7:15. When should we finish?
We continue for 30 minutes.
I see, okay. I should also mention that when I spent 10 days at Tina's house. During the first three days or so, nothing happened, and I thought it was probably all fraud. And then things started to happen in my presence. And when they started happening, I thought, well, I'm going to try to get these things on film. I brought a camcorder along, and I set it up in Tina's room where several things had moved, including my own teacup. I put the teacup out again, and I asked Tina to sit in her bed, and then we talked and had sort of informal exchanges, and then I hoped, of course, that things would move while the camera was focused on them. Well, nothing happened. Nothing happened. We took a rest period. We went outside the room. I was still following. Tina still had on full view. And when we got outside of the room, it literally rained with objects coming in from all sides. We went back in the room. Everything was quiet. So I told myself, well, when she knows she's being filmed, we're not going to get anything. So when I was in this laboratory in North Carolina, and we had this table set up, I hid a camera in an old piece of equipment, so I could film Tina without her knowing it. I thought that was the only way in which anything was going to happen. Well, Steve told me, this is unacceptable, this is unethical, you can't do that. He and I have somewhat different standards of ethics. I thought it would be the best thing for Tina and for myself if there would be strong evidence that she had abilities. But anyhow, unfortunately, I had to dismantle the camera, so I never got the photographic evidence that I hoped for. But certainly, we got evidence that things moved when we had Tina under full observation. Well, let us suppose that we are dealing with real phenomena, which I certainly am convinced that we are. What can we learn about this case? Several years before I did this, before I worked with Tina, before I explored this case, I had made analysis of 116 cases of poltergeist, reports of poltergeist occurrences in the sort of respectable literature, in serious books and journals. And I looked for patterns for features in the data that would tell me something about the underlying process. And these are the features I found. The poltergeist agents can be either sex. There were no more women than men. Number one. The median age of the poltergeist agent is 14 years old. So a cluster of the occurrences happen to young people. The ages go up to the early 70s and down to, I think, 3 or 4 years. But the median age is 14. In studies where psychological examinations were made of the agent, there was evidence of strong anger and frustration directed to parents or parent figures. These people were very unhappy. The segment from Unsolved Mysteries presents a rather happy family, close relations between the mother and the daughter, but that was not the way it was in the Resch household. And Tina was not easy to live with. She would burst out if she was the least bit frustrated, if she was told to vacuum the floor when she didn't feel like it. She would burst out, she'd swear, lash out at her mother, and this inevitably led to her mother saying, "Wait till your father comes home." And when John Resch came home, he would give the girl a sound beating. But Tina was unable to control herself. She just had to express herself, whatever happens. And as a result, it was really, she had a terrible time, and her parents probably also had a terrible time. In the cases, in several of the cases that in this survey I made, there were, in the surveys I made, about 20% showed symptoms of, yeah. In several of the cases, the agent showed symptoms of complex partial seizures or other forms of epilepsy. In other words, the brains of these people were subject to some electromagnetic storms. The duration of RSPK is 2 months. 2 months. In Tina's case, the initial outburst lasted a month and a half, and then later on, through hypnosis, it was activated for a few days, reactivated for a few days. The onset, the beginning of these phenomena show 2 characteristics. There often is a special family crisis. The family is moving, somebody is moving, or something has happened in the family that is probably upsetting to everyone. In Tina's case, the night before this all started, she had a major confrontation with her father. Again, she had misbehaved. Again, her mother Joan told her that when her father came home, she was going to get a thrashing. And again, when the father came home, he went for the girl. But this time, Tina, who wasn't, he went for the girl, and Tina didn't submit, she ran away from him. The lower floors in the Resch home are connected. The hallway is connected to the living room is connected to the kitchen is connected to the hallway, so you can move around in a sort of circle there. So she ran away from her father. The father followed. They made several circles in the house. She later told me that it was a little reminiscent of a Bugs Bunny movie, you know, when you have animals chasing each other. But anyhow, she then stopped at the kitchen and then took out a knife from the breadboard and said she would stab him if he came any closer. And at that time, her father, her adoptive father, completely cut all relations with her. He just turned away in disgust. That was it as far as he was concerned. He was finished with his adoptive daughter. There's another characteristic of the onset, of the beginning of poltergeist occurrences. They tend to happen when there are upswings in the geomagnetic fields. As you know, we all live in a big magnet, and this magnet is disturbed when there are sunspots and other cosmic events. And then this has been recorded for more than 100 years because it's useful information for radio transmission, for instance, because they're interrupted by these geomagnetic disturbances. Well, it turned out that the occurrence in the Resch home happened during a geomagnetic storm. A geomagnetic storm is defined as 3 days of above average geomagnetic disturbances. So here was another indication, aside from this connection, possible connection with epilepsy. Here was another connection to electromagnetism, it seemed. There's another characteristic we found. The incidents in the 116 cases that I surveyed were focused, were concentrated in time and space. The occurrences would usually only happen when the central person, when the agent was in the house and awake. When the person left for a while, the phenomena stopped. When the person fell asleep, the phenomena ceased, also stopped. In Tina's case, we observed the same. When Tina left the home for a short period of time, the incident ceased. And at night, when she fell asleep, they also stopped. It was also clear that this phenomenon, when in the study of these 116 cases, it was clear that this was that poltergeist is a social phenomenon, is an interpersonal phenomenon. It is related to the social situation in the house. When investigators come in, they become part of this social situation. If they come in as alleged scientists, the phenomena may cease, but then the occurrences are likely to start up again, as it did in the case of Tina. And they are especially likely to turn up, to take place when she interacts with the investigators. When I would look at her, talk to her, ask her how she felt and so on, then an object might move in a different part of the room, when I could be certain, or other people were certain, that she could not have interfered with it. There was another kind of observer effect. The phenomena were not inhibited by my interaction with Tina. On the contrary, they were more frequent. This was also the experience of the photographer. He took several pictures of the flying phone when he was talking to Tina. Not looking at the phone, but talking to Tina. Bruce Claggett, who observed this electrical disturbance, well, he extended this his little experiment by taping down all the switches in the downstairs part of the house, and then he would go around and turn off the electric light. Tina would be next to him, so he could observe her. He would the light would be on. He would turn it off, and he would fasten the switches with Scotch tape. And again, the Scotch tape disappeared and the switches turned on. He did at least between 50 and 75 such observations. One time he decided he was going to watch this phenomenon. And he sat down in front of one of the switches that had turned on and glared at it, looked at it, and nothing happened. So when you look at the object, nothing happens. If you look at Tina, something is liable to happen. It is as if she's saying, pay attention to me. Forget about the object, pay attention to me, and then I'll let something happen. Anyhow, that was what happened. So the same apparently applies to the video recording. If you try a video recording of objects, nothing happens. So I was going to do, when she got to North Carolina, we were going to do a recording of her in the, without her knowing that this equipment was working. And of course, I had to tell her that we had been sort of cheating on her, and again, my hopes were not fulfilled. That my hope to film the thing was not satisfied, or was not, that didn't happen. RSPK, poltergeist occurrences, are clearly physical occurrences, and they're clearly psychological occurrences. They reflect the social relationships between the agent and other people. But what could bring on a massive physical event away from the body? Clearly, brain waves or anything from the brain there would be no possibility that they can affect objects at a distance. So there had to be something else. Well, I have a colleague and friend, Hal Putoff. Hal has been doing some experiments in remote viewing, in ESP, remote viewing. But now his main interest is in what's called the CPE, zero-point energy. The zero-point energy is an electromagnetic field that exists all over the galaxy. It connects everything in the galaxy. And Dr. Putoff and his friends were hoping to mine this electromagnetic field and convert it to fuel for space travel. That's the hope. And I heard him give a talk about that, and I presented the questions I had about parapsychology. And he suggested that poltergeist agents may have the ability involuntarily to modulate this CPE so that it causes or can facilitate movements of objects. The interesting thing about this CPE, zero-point energy, or the energy of the vacuum, the interesting thing about that is that it interacts with inertia and gravity. So theoretically, if you can modulate the CPE, then you can cancel the gravity that usually holds an object in place. Physicists there's experimental evidence for the existence of the CPE, but it hasn't been possible so far to harness it. But anyhow, to me, this is the most plausible theory, and I'm now hoping to find a way to test this theory. It's also my opinion or my guess that poltergeist effects are an extreme form of normal processes within the body. Strenuous physical exertion, such as running and weightlifting, is sometimes associated with feelings of lightness. In sports, such as golf and baseball, players who enter the zone claim that the ball moves more forcefully and accurately than in ordinary states of consciousness. According to Japanese practitioners of martial art, ki, or in Chinese qi, operates within the body in internal ki and between body and environment in external ki, the equivalent of psychokinesis. Anecdotal stories about adepts who are adepts at external ki. These people, of internal ki in this case, are supposedly able to increase the weight of their body to mass or concentrate ki in the body and to dissipate or weaken ki to make the body lighter. Some adepts are said to knock down opponents or break physical objects by ki. If PK is involved in the workings of the skeletal muscles, the body should weigh less during physical activity and less during physical activity and more during rest. Death, the ultimate rest, should result in weight gains. A researcher, Louis Hollander, reports transient weight gains he worked with animals who were to be slaughtered. And so he weighed these animals at the moment of death. And he found transient short-term weight gains in 7 dying sheep, but not with 3 lambs and a goat that would be slaughtered. The gains range from 18 to 780 grams and lasted 1 to 6 seconds. Now he's the only one so far who has observed this kind of thing. Physics is considered the bedrock. This is a concluding remarks. Physics is considered the bedrock on which the other sciences rest and to which they can ultimately be reduced. This bedrock is not as solid as it once seemed. The change is epitomized. The change is emphasized by John Wheeler's concept of observer participancy. Wheeler is a notable American physicist at Princeton University. Wheeler says, observer participancy, the word participancy doesn't exist in the ordinary dictionary, it only exists in Wheeler's personal dictionary. Observer participancy gives rise to information, and information gives rise to physics. The idea that perception affects the physical world, of course, is not new. Bishop George Berkeley has said so, Bertrand Russell has said so. What is new is that the ideas of Wheeler and others like him are based on experiments. In the famous 2-slit experiments, photons behave like waves or like particles according to how the process is being observed. There's recently been a radical formulation or reformulation of observer participancy by another physicist, Roy Frieden. This book is, Frieden is a professor at the University of Arizona, but the book was published by Cambridge University Press. He says, and this is a very remarkable statement, he says, the request for data, that is, when the physicist seeks data, the request for data creates the law that ultimately gives rise to the data. The observer creates his or her local reality. Frieden goes beyond quantum mechanics when he derives statistical mechanics, thermodynamics, and the Einstein field equations from a theory where the observer, or the scientist, or the investigator is part of the phenomena that are measured. In other words, Frieden extends observer participancy to large-scale objects. And this seems to be what the poltergeist is telling us. In this case, the principal observer is the poltergeist agent. And the physical objects that are affected, that move, are affected presumably because they're significant to the agent. And they're significant to the agent because they represent important people in his or her life. The connection between the agent and the object occurs because both are within a part of the electromagnetic field of the universe, the CPE. A physical field which may also be a field of consciousness to which we all belong. It seems that the big minds of the Bhagavad Gita, of Zen Buddhism, and similar disciplines can be approached empirically. Thank you.